Goeienaand, good evening, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world. And in the video that's attached here, and I'm going to play a little clip for you, and then you can watch the whole thing. The reporter, this is from Eskom, asks De Ruyter, who's the CEO of Eskom, is he a racist? And I'll explain to you the context of why that's been said in this interview.
But I'm asking you, as a South African, as a white South African, are you racist?
Now, De Ruyter has just been cleared of racism allegations by an independent body looking into a claim by a procurement officer at Eskom. And clearly, this guy is not a racist. So why would Eskom even raise this question after he's been cleared? Not only that, under De Ruyter, who's been in the job at Eskom for about 18 months, under his leadership, the debt at Eskom has reduced from just under 500 billion rand to just over 400 billion rand. That's a 20% drop in the debt under a white CEO. Back in 94, when Eskom was slowly moved into the hands of well-connected ANC cadres as the CEOs, Eskom procured debts which went right up through the ceiling. And here you've got De Ruyter, who's turning it around. And the best that this Eskom reporter can say to him is, "Are you a racist? Give me a break." Please remember to subscribe to Loving Life on YouTube. Please remember to register on lovinglifetv.com, our own independent platform. Please remember to like this video, to share this video, and above all, please stay safe. And here comes the interview.
Eskom CEO De Ruyter has been cleared of a number of allegations, including racism and abuse of power. An independent inquiry has found no evidence to conclude that De Ruyter is guilty of the claims. In his report, Advocate Ishmael Semenya called the allegations by former Chief Procurement Officer Solly Chitangano wild and highly irresponsible. Chitangano sent copies of his allegations to a number of senior government officials, including the President, Cyril Ramaphosa, and the Minister of Public Enterprise, Pravin Gordhan. Well, for more on this, I'm joined by the man himself, De Ruyter. Mr. De Ruyter, good afternoon. Welcome to the Midday View on ANC. How do you feel now that you've been cleared of these allegations of racism, which, on the face of it, were very serious?
Yes, I think in the South African context, then, it's always a serious accusation to make against anybody, to accuse them of racism or racial bias. So I'm very pleased to have been vindicated by this independent inquiry, and I'm also pleased that I have been able to secure the full support of my board, and that we can now get ahead with a much more important task of fixing Eskom.
Going through this process must have been difficult for you, particularly because Eskom has got a big problems, which we'll get to right now. How was this process in your view?
The process has been very time-consuming. Obviously, if you look at the more than 1,100 pages of evidence that Advocate Semenya considered, it's clear that he has had to conduct numerous interviews with myself, with Mr. Chitangano and others, and it has been a huge distraction to the organization at large. So I think with that report now out there, let's focus on the task at hand.
Were you ever in doubt that maybe he might be right, that you might have done something using a racial lens or sort, or were you always confident that you'll be found to not have committed any form of racism?
No, I was absolutely confident from the word go. If you look at my track record, you speak to people of all races, all genders, who work with me, I think they will attest to the fact that I do not discriminate on the basis of race or gender, and that, in fact, the only criterion that I use to judge people is on the basis of performance. If you perform, then as a manager, I am satisfied. If you don't perform, then I will call you to account.
Why would Soli Chitangano have alleged that you are a racist? Did you think about what could have happened in your relationship with him? I mean, he had a very important role to play in Eskom in terms of procurement.
Correct. The role of the Chief Procurement Officer is indeed a very important role, particularly in an organization like Eskom, which procures about 141 billion rands of goods and services every year. So we are a major spender in the economy, and what we do drives major construction indices, for example, that are used for escalation. So we play a very important role. And I think that Mr. Chitangano maybe felt that I was putting him under pressure, that I was expecting to deliver savings. On our procurement bill, I set him certain targets that he failed to deliver on, and I drove certain initiatives which he either did not agree with or that he did not implement. And consequently, we had a tough conversation, and I think he was subsequently charged and dismissed from Eskom with effect of last week Friday.
The other allegations were about poor governance against you, and also about unfair recruitment processes, of which you've been cleared. Are you satisfied, therefore, with the findings of this independent investigation on those counts as well?
Absolutely. I think that the findings went into great length on each of the topics. Advocate Semenya, assisted by a firm of attorneys as well as two advocates, did a very thorough job. They interrogated and ventilated each of the aspects at length. With regard to the appointments, they spoke to both the chairman of the board as well as to our group executive for human resources, both of whom gave sufficient evidence to Advocate Semenya to persuade him that indeed due process and good governance had been followed, and that there was nothing untoward about the appointments that I have made.
Okay. Are you racist?
No. I think we've now established that beyond a shadow of a doubt.
That's an investigation that is established so in terms of this particular set of circumstances. But I'm asking you, as a South African, as a white South African, are you racist?
No, of course not. If I had any racist inclinations, I surely should not have picked the job of CEO of Eskom, right? It would have been a very silly move of me to do. I took this job maybe relying on a deeply unfashionable word, which is patriotism, to come and try and make a difference and to try and assist to the extent that I can in turning around a crucial national institution. And if I have to, in that process, hold people to account for their performance, black or white, then that is part of the territory. But that does not mean that I am racist at all. To put it into perspective, the appointments that I've made, and there were 7 of them to my executive committee, have all been people of color, not one white person. So to accuse me of racism is simply not substantiated either by the facts as presented by these accusations that Advocate Semenya classifies as wild, baseless, bizarre, unfounded, nor by my behavior.
Okay, the board has welcomed the findings. You have the board's support, and this independent inquiry has been welcomed by the board. And as you said when we started talking, Mr. De Ruyter, that it's now behind you. You want to focus on the work at hand. And all of this is coming at a time when we're in the middle of yet another load shedding. That's happening currently. What's the situation there? Can we begin there? This latest round of load shedding.
So on Sunday night, we lost 6 units of our generation system. There are 80 of them. And because our supply and demand in South Africa, particularly at times when we have cold weather like we've got now, is so finely balanced, the loss of these units precipitated load shedding. Now, this is, of course, very unfortunate and it's very regrettable, and it's something for which we as Eskom apologize to the nation. We can give you the assurance that we're working very hard to fix the assets that we've got. In the medium term, of course, we look forward to working with the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy to procure additional capacity, which the country desperately needs to structurally redress this very finely tuned balance between supply and demand.
And that will include the independent power producers?
That will include independent power producers. As Eskom, we'd also like to play a role in continuing to generate electricity for South Africa going forward. So we don't want to go quietly into that night. We want to participate in the future of electricity in our country. But clearly, there will be a greater role played by private investors in the provision of electricity to South Africa.
Okay, I mean, you've just cleared this big hurdle. We've been accused of being a racist. That's behind you. There are bigger issues as well besides this load shedding. I mean, you've got that split that you are busy with, I guess, into splitting Eskom into those 3 units, generation, transmission and distribution. And we know that the trade unions might not be 100% happy with that. Where is that process of splitting Eskom into those 3 areas?
So the unbundling of Eskom, or the legal separation of Eskom into 3 different legal entities, wholly owned subsidiaries. So let's put to bed any speculation that this involves privatization as well. Wholly owned subsidiaries of Eskom, generation, transmission, and also distribution. We're making good progress on that. We anticipate that if we get all of the necessary regulatory and legislative approvals, that we will be able to legally separate our transmission business by the end of this year. Now, why are we doing it? We are doing it precisely because we need private investors to have confidence in the independence of the buyer of electricity, so that there is adequate separation between Eskom generation and Eskom transmission, and that there's not somehow leakage of commercially sensitive information that would prejudice a private bidder into the power system. So the legal unbundling or separation is a hugely important step to addressing in the long term our electricity shortages going forward.
And you said that it's not a privatization process.
No, as I said, all 3 of these entities will be wholly owned subsidiaries of Eskom Holdings SA.
Okay. Now, the other issue that you've got there, which is a big headache, is the level of debt. I mean, how many billions of debt have you currently got, Mr. Director?
We've managed to work it down from about 496 billion to just a shade over 400 billion right now. We are sitting at about 401 billion rand in debt, which is still an enormous mountain of debt.
And how do you plan to chip it away into the future?
So it's a combination of levers that we pull. First of all, we are addressing our revenue. We have approached and we've been successful in persuading NERSA to give us a tariff increase, and unfortunately there will have to be further tariff increases in order to make the Eskom tariff reflective of our efficiently incurred costs. So not to subsidize our inefficiencies, but to reflect the costs that we efficiently incur. We're also looking at collecting money that is due to us. You may be aware that there are municipalities that have defaulted that owe us collectively now about 38 billion rand. We also have a number of areas in South Africa where people don't pay for electricity and where there are illegal connections. This is estimated to cost us about 4 to 5 billion rand a year. So these are big numbers that can really move the needle. Then we're also looking at our own cost base. We have a high procurement bill, which I referenced earlier, so we need to address that. And now that we can recruit a new chief procurement officer, I think we are going to look for someone who really will put pressure on our suppliers to reduce their costs to Eskom and thereby make electricity more affordable.
Yeah, labor also contributes. I mean, labor also, or employment costs rather, can also be high. But in this current climate, you can't be thinking of job cuts at Eskom?
No, we've been very clear about this from day one. We've always said there will be no forced retrenchments at Eskom, and we've stuck to that.
Is that still the case? I mean, are you still comfortable to say that now, facing all these big hurdles that you are dealing with?
Yes, that's a commitment that we've made, and that we will not deviate from.
Now, what about? Yeah, yes, sir. Yes. What's important?
I think it's a very important commitment. If you look at the backdrop of what other South Africans have had to go through during this time of the COVID-19 pandemic, 1 million job losses, people having to take pay cuts, no salary increases for the majority of South Africans. So that is the context against which we stick by this commitment.
Yeah, no, talking about jobs, I mean, there's currently a deadlock with unions. Our colleagues who spoke to the NUM, the biggest trade union in Eskom, the National Union of Mine Workers, you are offering 1.5%. They are not taking it. It's tough times. How are you approaching that wage dispute now?
So we've had 3 rounds of negotiations with the unions. We've also had extensive consultations with union leadership, where I personally got involved to explain some of the burning questions that they've raised. Unfortunately, we were unable to reach agreement on an acceptable wage increase, given our severely straitened financial position that we find ourselves in. And we have therefore declared a deadlock, and we have now referred the matter to the CCMA for arbitration and also mediation to see if we can get to an agreement under the auspices of the CCMA.
So you stuck on that 1.5% offer in terms of salary increase?
That is what the organization can afford at this point in time. And it's an offer that is made against the backdrop of 3 consecutive years of 7% increases offered to bargaining unit employees. So 3 consecutive years of above inflation, significantly above inflation increases, and our commitment not to implement forced retrenchment. So somewhere, something's got to give.
Okay, how would you describe the mood today in Eskom?
My sense is that our employees are becoming more optimistic. The messages that I get of support, of encouragement are very heartening. But when I also engage with our people, I think there's an understanding and a realization that as Eskom, we are embarked on a task of significant national importance, and we better get it right. And the establishment of this high-performance culture may not be welcomed by all, but there's a growing realization that we need to deliver the goods for South Africa, and we need to up our game to enable us to do that.
Are you still committed to that patriotic duty you sensed when you accepted this role as Chief Executive Officer? Looking back, including what you've just been through with those allegations that were now found to be unfounded in terms of you being a racist?
There's a job to be done, and for as long as the board and the minister would like me to continue doing that job, I'll be here to continue to do my best.
Okay, finally, Mr. Director, when can we look forward to no load shedding at all?
That is going to depend on the speed with which we can procure additional capacity. So we will have completed our maintenance program, by and large, by the end of September of this year. And then we should see a significant reduction in the risk of load shedding, but not yet the elimination of load shedding. That will only happen once we have procured sufficient additional electricity to be put onto the grid. And that's a question that I think you need to address to the IPP office at the DMRE.
Okay, Mr. Director, thank you very much for your time on the Midday View on ENCA.